Good evening and welcome to the Gin and Tonic Show on Friday, the 10th of May, 2019. And as always, with my amazing co-hosts, Stop Spamming and Thunderous. Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening, everybody that's listening to the show, both Muslim and non-Muslim.
Hi, guys.
Indeed. And if you're watching, give us a thumbs up if you enjoy the show, or at least you find like it's a place where you can come on a Friday night to interact with others, whether you agree with us or not. We do appreciate. Good evening, Marshall. Good evening, Pakistani Atheist. Hope you guys are well. So give us a few thumbs up there. That's always appreciative. Lets us know that at least people are listening. Whether you agree or disagree, that's all fine.
And if you do give us a thumbs down, which is also an option, please go ahead. Please feel free to do so. But it would be nice if you could tell us why, so that we can learn, get better.
Indeed. Stops, do you want to do the beginning part?
Oh, yeah. Hang on. Okay. We address Islam. We critique Islam. We are not Muslim phobists. Islamophobics, that is a stupid word. That doesn't exist. Okay, we are all afraid, genuinely afraid of Islam in the form that it's being presented today. So anyone who comes to me and says, I want Sharia, that scares the shit out of me. So this is not a phobia at all. This is real. So I am maybe suffering from Muslim phobia. This is something I don't know. It could be. I'm not aware of it because those Muslims that I do meet that are stupid or idiots or whatever, I just meet for a very short time. And there's no way that I am going to generalize from their individual behavior that all Muslims are like that. So that doesn't work. Now, we condemn categorically any abuse, oppression, any kind of slavery, any kind of violence, any kind of abuse of women, anything like that. Okay, so there's the sentence, the question that I ask Muslims all the time: can you categorically condemn anyone who performs, no matter why or under what conditions or when or whatever, any kind of sexual activity as soon as it involves a 9-year-old child? This is something where I can categorically say, yes, I will condemn anyone who performs any sexual act on a 9-year-old child. Doesn't matter whether it's girl or boy or anything. And this is something that is very incredibly difficult for most Muslims, because they automatically think of Muhammad, even though they say, well, no, he didn't. She was 17, but they will not condemn anyone who performs any sexual act on a 9-year-old. It's quite uncanny. So we embrace free speech. I actually do so like completely and utterly. And I embrace, and we embrace, I think I'll speak for everyone, criticism. We embrace factual and constructive criticism. If somebody says to us, hang on, what you are saying about the Quran, if it says beat your wives, well, this is factually incorrect. Cool. Then show us where it is incorrect. Don't just make the claim and tell me that you're going to fuck my mother or something. That doesn't work. Just tell me what is wrong, why it is wrong, and what would be correct. That is the way how we work here, okay? Now, overall, we're decent human beings. I sometimes, get a little bit irritated if people really, give me stupid arguments. Then my attention span is somewhat reduced. If you want to comment, question, correct, and you're simply curious about anything Islam, you've come to the right place, because this is where we do that. And I don't know any other show that you can call in, that you can discuss, which is focused only on Islam and it's based in English. One more thing, please don't go to Patreon, don't go to PayPal, don't go. Support us by attending, support us by discussing, support us by getting the word out, and support us by just being there and being part of this whole group. Don't try and give us money. This is not the point. We're not here for money. This is not, well, this is not my income or anything. So don't come throw money at us here, or bikinis or anything. So, yeah. And at the moment, I'm still saying this again, but I'm dragging my feet as well. We're using the Google Hangout platform to get a live interaction with viewers, the possibility to invite and host people on the panel, and an unedited archive on YouTube. So this is the reason why we're doing this, and this is who we are, and what we are doing.
Brilliant. Thunderous, do you want to add anything additional?
Yeah, I think one of the fairest things that we can say is that the word Islamophobia is a misnomer, because the word phobia is having an irrational fear. As an ex-Muslim, and as you guys are critics of Islam, based on the fact that you actually read the Quran, the fear that we have of Islam is not irrational. From experience and reading through the Islamic sources, our fear of Islam is actually rational. So it'd be inappropriate to use such words, hence why we have shows like this to discuss what we're reading. And if there's any opportunity for us to be corrected, we'll show humility and be corrected if our understanding is incorrect in the way that we read things. But we are adopting an attitude that very similar, if not the same, identical to the first generation of Muslims, whereas as Muhammad was receiving these ayahs and surahs, he was relaying them to his audience. There was no, if you like, commentaries at the time. Those would have come 400 years later. The hadiths are very spasmodic and very erratic. So we're taking it exactly as the first generation of Muslims would have listened and understood Islam as it was being revealed by its revered prophet.
Yes, absolutely. And one thing, I mean, funny that nobody brought it up, because we are in the month of Ramadan, which, according to the people who lived at the time, is the most important month in the Islamic calendar for several reasons. Number one, it's one of the declared holy months. Number two, it's the month where you're supposed to stop eating, drinking, having sex, or anything physical. And this is now the interesting part, from sunrise to sunset. And there's a lot of discussion going around about this, because people don't actually agree on this. Some people say it needs to be from darkness to darkness, which is not sunrise or sunset, or it needs to be actually when the sun disappears, but there still can be some light. The worst thing, of course, is that there are many regions, areas on this planet, because we're living on a sphere which was unknown to the people then, where there is no sunset, there is no way of determining when the day is actually over. You need to use a phone or some sort of a device to establish that, and those obviously were not there available for the people of the first generation, so they were blissfully unaware of anything like that. So yeah.
And I just want to echo what Thunderous said, and also bring something up here. Islamophobia, this nonsense term that I think we all agree is nonsense, is used in a way as a way to shut down conversation or to smear critics of Islam. And as my co-host said, we critique the ideology and not necessarily Muslims. However, there are a certain number of Muslims that do, require some critique as well. And just in case people, I will remind you, here is a Pew Poll study, really, based on the moderate side of Islam. This was done in the Pew Forum in 2013. And this was a rough extrapolated figure from the Pew Poll reporting of questions that they asked in the Muslim world, right? Death for leaving Islam, around 584 million, right? So that's a pretty severe view that over 500 million Muslims have. Death for adultery, 748 million. Sharia should rule, 1.1 billion, the vast majority of Muslims, and a wife should obey her husband, 1.39 Muslims. Now, that's not to say that every Muslim that we speak to would accept any of these or believe them, although it would be useful to ask them the question. But what we are critiquing is definitely the ideology. So it's not necessarily all Muslims, although there will be some that will fall under that critique if they adhere to certain of these ideas or principles. And again, we'll go through the Quran now, and if you are a Muslim who wants to join us and give your side, then feel free to do so. And as Stops was saying there as well, somebody was asking there about the effects of this fasting of Ramadan, and my understanding is certainly that it's not a healthy practice to abstain from both completely not eating and, more importantly, not drinking any liquids whatsoever for a vast majority of the day. And I think, Stops, you've probably done some study into this in the past, and maybe Thunderous, you have as well. Just before we get into the verses and so forth, have you got anything that you remember? Because when I've looked, and I don't have something to hand because it's just a question that come up, because obviously we're in the month of Ramadan. What's the view, or what's your understanding about the health or not of the way that Muslims fast for Ramadan, particularly in countries where the vast majority of the day they're not eating or drinking?
I think for me personally, I've not really looked into the benefits, or in fact the non-benefits, as it were, of the practice of Ramadan during the course of a whole month. I remember doing some research on the origins of Ramadan, which has pagan roots, though I don't have the information to hand because I didn't think to have it ready for this evening. I was actually I did have a point and I've forgotten what it was, so I'll let Stops go and then maybe I'll remember by the time he's finished.
Around health of Ramadan or something, maybe?
No, it wasn't about the health
Okay.
of Ramadan. I'll remember in moments when Stops finished.
The health aspect is actually quite appalling, because what happens now, you need to remember, you have a 24-hour McDonald's. It's closed. They only open 6 o'clock in the evening. And then they open until 6 o'clock in the morning, and then they close again. So during the day, even at 20, and they have these huge poles, which are like 50 meters high, 24-hour McDonald's, and they're closed during Ramadan because people during the day are not allowed to eat. So what do they do in the evening? They go and stuff their faces like crazy, because now they need to make up for all those hours, 8-9 hours of non-intake of food. So they go absolutely moggy. And this is why you have all these health statistics which say that the worst month is actually the Ramadan month, because that is when a lot of people pick up weight. This is when obesity, adipositas, all these things, they come in, because it is stuffing your face with anything and everything that you can. So people order 20, burgers at McDonald's because they're so bloody hungry. So it's very unhealthy.
Yeah, the point I wanted to raise was that when you consider in Islamic parlance, one of the benefits of Ramadan is because they claim it brings like a solidarity between the affluent and those that are impoverished. So it kind of helps those that are not in a position of affluence where they can benefit from having perhaps the nicer meals during the course of a day, that may be on living on less than $1 in a day, in comparison to the oil-rich millionaires and billionaires quite affluent, and they can dine on feasts.
Yeah.
So having the fast is supposed to bring the two classes together, but the irony is it only happens for that one period of time during the Ramadan, which lasts for about a month. Then the other 11 months of the year, the gulf, the chasm between the impoverished and the affluent remains. There is so what is said to be a benefit as far as a social class and financial structure is concerned is only word of mouth, and it's almost like a repeated tract or salutation or response that they give to people, but there is no evidence of the Islamic world actually using that situation to benefit the poor and the impoverished for their so-called Muslim brothers. The Muslim people that are living in an impoverished state still live in an impoverished way. There has not been any financial, social, medical benefit for them from the affluent and the well-off. And when we consider how many billions and trillions of assets that the Muslims have from the oil-rich families and such, and the Gulf states, that are not funding any of that wealth into an infrastructure in the Arabian countries that could be a testimony to the benefits of Ramadan, so that the Western world can look at and say, this is what the solidarity means, and this is the benefit of the solidarity. We see no evidence of that. It is just merely lip service.
Yeah, and especially if you pay a fine and you're punished if you are eating as a Muslim during Ramadan, because more and more Muslims are no longer fasting, because they realize this is stupid, so they don't. The funny thing is that in the Middle East, people are stopping this nonsense, and it's outside of the Middle East, like in the UK or the US, where people are where Muslims are more fundamental Muslims and are more, looking what you just said, Thunderous, this group feeling. We are all in this together. We are all fasting together, which is something you don't need to do if you are in a Muslim majority country. So this is quite funny that in a Muslim majority country, they're not so strict about this anymore, whereas outside they are.
Yeah, can I just add on? You've just used the word there. That was something else I wanted to bring up earlier in my commentary earlier on, and that is it's often been repeated on the show over the past few months, where it is the Quran and the Hadith that define what Islam is, not what Muslims do or say. They don't define Islam. The holy text define Islam. So when we're using words like fundamental and when the media rather uses the term fundamental and such, it is the irony is, what are the human beings that are labeled fundamental? They're the ones that are actually following Islam to the core or to the T, or as close to the first generation of Muslims in Muhammad's era, as opposed to those who are peaceful or are kind, or that you know, your neighborhood Muslims are very nice people and very well to get on with. Those are probably the fundamentals in reality when we look at the Islamic text. So what we're doing as well, when we're looking at people who agree or don't agree with 9-year-old girls having sex with 54-year-old men, the Muslims that say that is wrong, well, the reality is, by default, if you're claiming that you're a Muslim, you have no choice but to say that it is correct, that it is right, that you go along with it. Everything in the Quran and the Hadith, you have no choice but to support the drinking of camel urine, the fact the teachings of Adam being 90 foot tall, the moon being split in half, or that somewhere on planet Earth there is a giant iron wall covered in brass, built by Dul-Qarnain. You have no choice but to agree with these things, because these teachings are the teachings of your God and your Prophet. The fundamentalist is the one that denies it. That is the fundamentalist. And this is what we'll be discussing when we're looking at the Quran. Those who don't want to accept these things are the fundamentalists. The rapers, the murderers, the killers, the terrorists, they're not the fundamentalists. Those are the Muslims.
Well, they're just adhering to the fundamentals of the religion in a straightforward reading, right? And I think many of the Muslims that we speak to haven't actually read the Quran, or if they have, they've sort of glossed over it and listened to, you know, the imam or the sheikh or whoever is saying something. I mean, you know, when I used to go to church, I read the Bible once, but I used to listen to the pastor or whatever, and presumably the same is the case with many of the Muslims. So they don't really know what's in the book. They've never looked at the tafsirs. Some of the hadiths they might have read, you know, but all you're saying with a fundamentalist is they adhere to the fundamentals of Islam, which is, if you want to be a consistent Muslim, that's what you should be doing, right? So I'm always interested in how Muslims can deviate from this and find interpretations that are much further away than a straightforward reading of the text.
Yeah, I've had a guy on Facebook now who says the Quran doesn't say anything about slaves, sex slaves, beating your wives, killing apostates or killing gays. None of that is in the Quran.
He's obviously not reading the same Quran, right? Maybe he's got a new version of the Quran that misses out all of those bits and jumps verses, right?
Let me find something positive in the hadith. Now, I'm getting more and more, it's getting tough to find something positive, okay? But I found something in Bukhari, in Volume 1, Book 4 and 188. It was narrated by Ibn, Shihab. Mahmud bin Arabi, who was the person on whose face the Prophet had ejected a mouthful of water from his family's well while he was a boy, and Urva, who testified each other, said, whenever the Prophet performed ablution, his companions were nearly fighting for the remains of the water. So what is the good message? Well, saving water by sharing. What I used to call save water, shower with a friend.
Yes, pretty straightforward, right? Again, we have somebody just going through the text chat here before we get into the verses here. We've got our friend Muhammad Islam claiming that by 2050, according to Pew, we'll be ahead of the Christianity in terms of numbers. And I think you've got something to say, but even if that were the case, that's by birth rate primarily, and not because the overwhelming number of people are suddenly finding out Islam is demonstrably true and converting for those reasons. So got to be careful of the reasons.
But the thing is, to see, even with that, I fail to discern why Muslims will jump on the bandwagon of Islam would be this great religion in greater numbers, because that's only up till, it hasn't exceeded any numbers yet, but let's assume that it will do. How does that make it any more true?
Well, exactly. It's an appeal to authority, right? Because many people believe it, therefore it's more likely to be true. That's a fallacy, right?
Okay, so sorry, I mean, if you look at it politically, then let's look at politics. If communism had the greatest proportion of people voting for it, does that make communism true? or capitalism true, or fascism true if people were voting for it in this way or that way? No, it doesn't make it true. It just shows that's the direction the people have gone in, or what they consider to be suited for their lifestyle or their political or sexual or financial orientation. That's all. It doesn't prove something is true just because you've got the greatest number of votes going for it. Brexit as an example, just because more people have said coming out of Europe rather than staying in with Europe, doesn't mean that that's any more truer than staying in, or staying in is any more truer than or leaving. It's just opinion.
Yeah, we don't go by the number of people. Sometimes it can be an indication. It's more. I would look at it more closely. Again, it doesn't mean it's true, but I'd look at it more closely when there's a vast majority of experts in particular fields that lean towards something. That would give me a reason to look at whatever it is. But like you say, that doesn't necessarily mean it's true. And also, as I think Stops has pointed out before as well, oftentimes Muslims convert in, but they convert out quite quickly as well. Within 4 months, I think, was the number that Stops quoted as well. So none of these are pointed out by Muslims, right? So everybody that takes the Shahada or somehow converts in, perhaps some even convert without taking the Shahada, those numbers are somehow counted in their own way. But of course, if people leave, well, then those numbers aren't counted, or they must be something wrong, or they didn't really understand Islam, or they weren't really a Muslim, blah, blah, right?
Or they didn't read in Arabic.
But what people don't understand is that this Pew thing is not based on data. It's not based on, it's a projection. It's just if we continue like this, if we ignore all the outside facts, if we ignore attrition in other areas, then if we just make it into a straight line, then this is what happens by 2050. So this doesn't, the people don't know how to read these things. People don't know how to use data. They don't know how to use information. They just see a number, and then they sort of make up the rest that is around the number, even though they don't understand the number. And then you come out with these stupid claims that by 2050, there'll be more Muslims than whatever. But as soon as you look at the facts, as soon as you look at the data, you see this is utter bullshit. But it's very difficult. I don't know if you know this study, how how fakes distribute and how truth distributes around the world. Because they use Twitter, for example, and they saw with this vaccination that a fake message will get more people much quicker than a true message will. And they showed this using several examples. And this is the way they work. So, you give people this kind of hope, because, let's face it, Islam doesn't fit into the 21st century. Most Muslims are better than their God, and they realize that Islam doesn't work anymore. Now they're getting desperate. So if you're getting desperate, what are you going to do? Well, you're going to, we had these 20, or was it 14? I can't remember, rules of a cult. And this is one of them. We just generate some false propaganda, or just general propaganda is false. Just some propaganda which makes it look as though you are in the winning group, and then more people join because they want to be in the winning group. And people tell them, yes, you're in the winning group. We are winning. We are the Muslims, and fastest growing, and blah blah blah. And not everybody has critical thinking skills. Not everybody has the ability to say, yeah, but hang on, let me first check this, and then you get a totally different result.
Yeah, people, but that's a human bias that we've got to be very careful of, right? Whatever confirms your worldview or your current views on reality, or whatever the case is, you're more likely to believe those without questioning them, and those that go against it, you're more likely to dismiss without questioning them. And so we've got to be aware of that.
Yeah, it's very much like, we've discussed this before. It's very much like when you enter a debate between, let's say, a Muslim and a Christian, or a Muslim and an atheist. The audience have pretty much got their minds made up as to who they're going to listen to, and they're there to support their man, irrespective of the arguments or counter arguments on either side. And it's the same with the Muslim; they'll cling on to anything that promotes or benefits Islam. I think in these situations, for me, there's a phrase or a quote that's alleged attributed to Gandhi, where he said, "Being in the minority of one does not make the truth any less true."
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And somebody brought to my attention as well something here that I just want to see if I can. if anybody knows it, right? So somebody brought to my attention that EF Dawa, I'm not going to link directly, but I've put it into the chat. You can go and search under that. Apparently, they're doing something similar to this. And I got a message on Facebook from a follower basically asking, can they come on our show? Or can we go on theirs? And I said, well, I'm sure myself and Thunderous and Stops would be keen to go on their show. It's very unlikely that any of them will come on here. Now, if you go and search for that and watch it, quite a number of them are the new converts from Speaker's Corner. Then you've got Darren Hamza, and you've got some other fellow with glasses that apparently claims to know something, or other Muslims think he knows a fair amount. If you know any of these people, please invite them here. I try to invite them here. It falls on deaf ears, and there's all sorts of excuses. We definitely go on their show, but it's very unlikely they're going to come on here. So it seems to be sort of more brave Muslims that want to come here, because of course it's not Speaker's Corner. They can't just talk nonsense and hope that it's going to be accepted or won't be challenged. And of course we can look these things up. All of this is not good if you are presenting things that are, shall we say, weak at best. So there we go. If you know any of these people and you can invite them or tell them to come over here, we're more than welcome to have them on here as a guest on the show, and we'll treat them, pretty well. So again, it is an adult show, so we're not going to use kid gloves, but we don't need to swear and curse and all that sort of stuff. So feel free to invite any of them if you know them. There was somebody on here that did say he wanted to join here. I did say friend me on Facebook. So if you're listening and you're a Muslim, I'll post it again here very briefly, so that if you want to come on the show, come and chat to us, give us your take on the verses that we're going to be reading now, then I've posted a link there, facebook.com/Rob Speakers Corner UK, one word. So send me a message or friend me on Facebook and say, hey, I'd like to join the show as a guest. I'm a Muslim. Then you're more than welcome to come and join us here. So with that said, is there anything else you guys want to add before? Otherwise, we'll go straight into Surah 238.
No, let's carry on.
All right, let me share the screen here. And again, if Stops wants to at some point read his version, the nicer version, I think you were saying, Stops, then
it's the benevolent version. It's the one that you get when you really start interpreting and you really start looking at all the negative things and try and get rid of as many of them as possible. Then you go to the Rashid Khalifa version.
All right, well, let's start here. So we've got corpus, so you can read that. I'm not going to read that one, but that's that is the exact word for word translation as far as I understand it.
Well,
so we'll
as close as. There are some liberties, but usually it's quite good, yeah.
And then we've got the interpretations, Sahih International and Yusuf Ali. So 238, here we go. Sahih International. Maintain with care the obligatory prayers, and in particular the middle prayer, and stand before Allah devoutly obedient. Yusuf Ali, guard strictly your habit of prayers, especially the middle prayer, and stand before Allah in a devout frame of mind. So Stops, what is this middle prayer?
Nobody knows. This is the problem.
Oh, okay.
We have a sentence in the Quran which says all the jinn and humans are created to worship Allah. Does Allah tell us how we should worship? No. There is not a single indication how you're supposed to do this. Now, Muslims come around and say, well, yeah, this is the prayer, because by praying, we worship. Where does it say that in the Quran? Well, it doesn't. So they automatically sort of put a link there between the two and say the worship that is required, not just a form of worship, but the worship is the contact prayer. Now, in the Quran, like we've shown this a couple of times, it doesn't mention which prayers. It says, yeah, you can pray when the sun comes up, when the sun goes down, or whenever. As we've seen, it doesn't work everywhere like that. So there's just certain times that people feel like it could be correct. And we then have the story with Muhammad on his flying donkey going up to heaven and haggling with God over the amount, with the number, and coming back with the number 5. And then this number 5 has become the rule according to which Muslims need to pray 5 times a day. I mean, this was copied by the Yazidis did this, the Zoroastrians did this. So this is nothing new. So they do this 5 times a day. Now, the middle prayer It's just something that is mentioned, and Muslims have now assigned a time to it. In Mecca, for example, it doesn't work in other cities, but in Mecca, this is what they do. So we don't know what these prayer times are. They are arbitrary, they are human-made, and they're not defined.
Yeah, and here's Jalalain Tafsir. Maintain the 5 prayers by performing them at their appointed times, and the middle prayer, either that of the afternoon or the morning or the midday or another prayer. Well, I mean, the middle can be any number you want then, apart from the beginning and the end, I suppose.
But the thing is, you see, when it says, irrespective of the middle prayer, if all you're doing is standing before your Allah, repeating exactly the same words, how can one prayer be more important than another prayer if all you're doing is exactly the same thing?
Yeah, good point. Yeah.
You know, so, and also, if you're repeating a prayer 5 times a day, why is that particular? Obviously, they're assigned to a certain part of the day, one in the morning, one in mid-morning, one in the afternoon, one late afternoon, and one in the evening. Whichever one is the middle prayer, why would that particular time of the day be more important than any other time of the day? So there are 2 things there that don't make sense. One, if you're saying exactly the same thing 5 times a day, is one thing in itself, but 2, why is that particular time of the day more important than any other time of the day when all you're doing is exactly the same thing?
Yeah, I'm just trying to see if it says anything about that. There's Jalalain.
But
Sure.
Jalalain is saying something 400 years later.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
For the first 400 years, this would have to imply with no Jalalain.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe if you're a Muslim watching, you can explain what is special about this middle prayer, given that according to Al Jalalain anyway, it can be in the morning, the afternoon, or some other time. So what specifically is supposed to be important about this? But I think apart from that, it's pretty straightforward that they're just saying, make sure that you do pray here. And this sort of undefined middle prayer, which would be, in my world, if you're praying 5 times, that would be the 3rd prayer, right? I think that to any rational person would be the middle prayer. Now, presumably, Muslims will reinterpret Jalalain to mean, hey, this middle prayer could be at these times, morning, afternoon, or some other time. Well, wherever you live, surely you break up the day into 5 parts, right? That you're awake at least, and the middle one would be the 3rd prayer of the day, whenever that is. But what specifically is more important about that? Perhaps somebody can tell us.
Thing is, as well, when you consider that Allah's asking you to guard your habit of prayer, especially in the middle prayer. Now, irrespective of as to whether you look at it as a father and a child relationship, in this situation, Allah being the father and the human being the child, or whether it's a master and servant, Allah being the master and the Muslim being the servant, how you can have your child or your slave approach you and say exactly the same thing, and that is the sum total of your relationship, where as a father you have a child that approaches you 5 times a day and says exactly the same thing 35 times a week. How can one particular part of the day where your child or your servant says exactly the same thing be of any benefit to the child or the servant or you as a master or a father? How does
Yep,
that
good question.
how does that benefit the relationship as a child to a father or a servant to the master?
Well, again, maybe a Muslim could tell us what specifically is it about this middle prayer. But of course, doing it 5 times a day or more gets you into a routine, right? Because presumably Allah knew that He created these flawed human beings, and in order for them to follow and to worship and to submit, etc., it's almost like they need to be deprogrammed or reprogrammed from their natural state into the state of following, this particular procedure day in and day out, right? It's like a bit like being in the army, right? I was in the army, and you see the SAS and the rest of it. If you do the same thing and you instruct it, eventually it becomes second nature, right? But it's not the way you were born.
That's exactly where I wanted to go, but I wanted to go a couple of surahs later, a couple of ayahs later. But it's like the psychological impact that it's going to have on the audience with the first generation of Muslims and before Muhammad, how he was actually it was like a controlling technique to control the first century audience by having them do this. They were being programmed.
Yeah, I think so. Anything else to add there, Stops, or should we move on?
No, carry on.
Okay, so 239. Sai International. And if you fear an enemy, then pray on foot or riding. But when you are secure, then remember Allah in prayer, as He has taught you that which you did not previously know. Yusuf Ali, if ye fear, yeah, exactly. If ye fear an enemy, pray on foot or riding, as may be most convenient. But when you are in security, or when ye are in security, celebrate Allah's praises in the manner He has taught you, which ye knew not before. So this pray when you're in fear of an enemy, presumably this is a different prayer to the prayer that you would do when you're in security to celebrate Allah.
Not necessarily. It just means what I read here, which I think is quite funny, is that if you have an enemy somewhere, then you need to run away, and then but even when you're running away, you should still pray.
Yeah.
But then you are allowed to pray even when you are riding or when you are running. I mean, who the hell is going to pray when he's riding on foot? And especially, how do you run away when you're on your knees? That's not very efficient, is it?
Well, presumably that's part of what makes it different, right? Is that even if you were doing the same prayer, your 5 times a day prayer, just extra times because you were in fear of an enemy, presumably what makes it different is that you don't have to kneel down, face Mecca, prostrate yourself, etc. You could be doing it by simply, being on foot or riding, right? But only presumably because you're in fear, right? So as long as you're in fear, you can do it differently.
Of course, because this is the funny thing. Yes, you should pray. You should pray 5 times a day, but it doesn't stop you from praying more, because there's also the middle of the night prayer. And this could be, quite rightly, as you say, if a running away fear prayer. Well, it's so funny.
Well, that's an interesting one. Something to keep in mind, 239 then. So when a Muslim says, okay, either I only have to pray 5 times a day, or it always has to be a particular way by, facing Mecca and, prostrating, etc. You could always say, well, what about when you're in fear of an enemy, right? How do you do that on foot or riding? That would seem to be, pretty impossible. I wonder if Jalalain says anything.
But also, when you look at the surah, it says there, celebrate Allah's praises in the manner He has taught you. Well, where has He taught us this? Where has He taught us the positives? And where has He taught us what to say in this prayer? He hasn't taught us any of that yet in the Quran. So
yeah, exactly.
So He hasn't taught us any of this. And when it says to celebrate Allah's praises, how can it be a celebration of praise if all you're doing, yet again, I repeat, if you're saying the same thing parrot fashion 35 times a week? How can that be a praise to anybody? If your child, if you make a meal for a guest, they come round one evening and you make a meal for them, and they give you some kind of verbal appreciation for it, fine, you'll accept that, and you'll be moved that your visiting guest gave some acknowledgement in their own words. But if you keep inviting them for a meal and they say exactly the same thing every time they finish the meal, the same words, after a while it's going to be a bit laborious and torturous to listen to, and you'll see the lack of sincerity in that, and you'll just see that as a mere default repeats by a rote a salutation to the hospitality that you've shown them, and pretty much soon you'll get fed up of hearing it. How on earth can Allah derive any celebration of praises from these words that He hasn't revealed yet thus far?
Well, obviously, He wants His creation to submit, right? And one way to do it is to get everybody doing the same thing. There's a lot of power in numbers, right? If people will do silly things or people will do all kinds of things, if they do it in numbers and there's a lot of like-minded people doing it, there is a lot of power in that, whether you can use it for good or not good or whatever the case is. But that is certainly something in the human psyche, right? So if everybody's doing it, then none of them are going to get tired, right? If you and I, who are non-believers, had to hear it 5 times a day, every single day, yes, that will probably drive us nuts. But if it's one of them, obviously it's not, right? And that's all they care about.
But
also just
sorry, I'll carry on.
Well, I just wanted to say with the Jalalain thing, in other words, he's saying here basically, in other words, in whichever way you can, facing the direction of the Qibla or otherwise, right, making the gestures of flexion and prostration. But when you are secure from fear, then remember God. Okay, so this is to my ear anyway, this is a contradictory statement at first glance, right? In other words, whenever you can, facing the direction of the Qibla or otherwise. In other words, face anyway. Well, if you're running away or you're on horseback and you're not facing the Qibla, what then? Which is presumably going to be very rare that you're actually running or facing the Qibla, or riding towards the Qibla, or otherwise. So in other words, to me, face any direction and do the prayer, right? I mean, what's the point of the Qibla or otherwise? That sort of one negates the other. Either you're facing the Qibla or you're facing otherwise, right? So that's a bit odd to me. But anyway, he's just basically repeating what's being said there, right? So he doesn't really add anything to it there. He just
What is funny is that God, if you attack somebody else, God is behind you. And remember, you did not kill them, but Allah did. But now, why would Allah create people who are an enemy of Muslims, that they will attack Muslims, and then he can't help this Muslim? So the Muslim has to run away and just pray. Pray what? Allah already knows what is going to happen to this guy. So praying to this guy is not going to change anything. So what is the point of this praying when you're running away?
Presumably, a Muslim could answer, just off the top of my head, that, hey, it's another way to be in his good graces, because if you were to die, then while you were running away or while you were doing whatever you're doing, then praying is obviously one of the best things you could do, right? So if you did fear for your life, then, that's a better thing. And again, when it comes to judgment, that might be totted up in your favor.
Okay. So it's a comfort for you.
Yeah, and maybe extra points for you on Judgment Day, right? But there's Ibn Abbas as well, saying if you fear the enemy's sword, then pray standing or on horseback in whatever direction. So he's saying whatever direction. Jalalain is saying facing the Qibla or otherwise. So basically, you can pray in any which way. And basically what they mean by pray is presumably say the words that you would normally say, because even that's not clear, because they could easily have said, well, say the prayer, the 5 times a day prayer, or they could have used some words to make clear that that's in fact the prayer. But let's assume that is, because it's not clear there. Then you can do it in any way, right? So as long as the words come out of your mouth, then that's fine, right?
But no one is saying what the words are to come out of your mouth, because Allah hasn't revealed these words just yet. So how do they know what to say, and how do they know that we've already got the Qibla? They keep mentioning the Qibla because the Qibla came out several weeks ago in our discussion of this chapter, but the words haven't come out yet, and neither of the postures.
And they never will.
Exactly. So that we're getting a verbatim here from Allah that in his clear book made easy to understand. But we don't know what the words are for the prayer that he's asked us to repeat 5 times a day, 35 times a week, using certain postures, with a middle prayer that's the most important prayer of all.
Yeah. And so the interesting thing that I see here is the traveler prays 2 units of prayer. And now comes the interesting part. While the resident prays 4 units, that before the revelation of the Quran. Now, how can a resident pray 4 units before the Quran was revealed?
Yeah, I didn't even get to that part. I was still concerned with it. But what's the difference between the traveler and the resident?
Okay, but that's cool. The resident has to go and always face the Qibla. Yeah, but the traveler doesn't have to. Okay, cool. But there is something missing in the Quran. There is something missing, which is, number 1, the definition of worship, and number 2, the definition of prayer. It's the most important thing in Islam, and there is no definition anywhere. You have to wait until Muhammad comes around, tells the people, and even he is not complete. He's just giving you some indications. But it's scholars who come up with the way to pray 500-600 years later. They determine how to pray.
Yeah, so that might have been a problem for Muslims up until that point, right? But presumably today, a modern Muslim will say, well, I follow the scholars, the Hadith, the Quran, and put all of those together, right? It's not a problem for me. obviously we can respond to that point, but the point that you just made stops us up until scholars had to make this decision, because clearly Muhammad and Allah couldn't do a clear enough job. Those people would have been, at odds on how to do this.
No, they're screwed. They can't do the most important thing that is demanded in Islam, and that is praying. And here it says you have to pray 4 units of something that hasn't been revealed to you yet.
Which is what I said about before the commentaries came up 400 years later. What were they doing? And they were the generation of Islam.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which was said to be the purest, then the following generation, then the third generation after that. So how could they be as good as what Muhammad claims to are if there's no direction, no words, and no postures given or revealed just yet?
Yeah, and then the Quran claims he taught you what you never knew, but he doesn't teach me.
No.
He doesn't tell me anywhere how to pray.
And I wanted to go along with that, because if you look at the religious society that it had then, they would have had Zoroastrians, Christians, and Jews, and other forms of religions. No doubt their prayers would have been something that which would have taken more of a free will, where they could personalize it in their own ways, or in their own words, in their own ways, for what their own needs were, given any situation that they were in. That has removed the personality of prayer in the way that Muhammad's explaining to do it. So it seems to be a backward step, not a forward step, in a religious society that's supposed to be from this religion that's claiming to be a liberation from paganism.
Yeah, but Thunderous, look, they had the situation where they had pagans, where they had the Zoroastrians, they had the Jews, they had the Christians, and now what they were trying to come up with is their specific Arab flavor. How do you do that? There's only so many things that you can change. I mean, they're not going to reinvent something. They can't really make something radically different. So they just take what they have, put all the ingredients into one pot, add a bit of Arabic, and Bob's your uncle. That's all it is.
And as you say, it came some time afterwards, right? And even the people that were following Muhammad at the time, that would have only been revealed over a period of time, right? So they wouldn't have been, even if they had become good, became a follower, what sort of Muslim would they have been until these sort of things were revealed at a later stage, right? You would think that it would have been, he would have had this miraculous encounter in the cave, and that would have been the perfect time to explain the prayer, explain what needs to happen, and how to convert Muslims. That's how I think any rational person would have seen or would have expected this to have played out, right? But of course, it doesn't happen that way. If that's the most important, surely that's the first thing you want to learn and to teach. And how do you then get other people convinced of this, right?
It seems to be like an evolving religion, that it becomes more Muslim as time progresses. The first generation, third generation, fourth generation, when they die out, then it seems like Islam takes on a new lease of life and becomes more Muslim, more religious, and more Islamic after the contemporaries as such have passed away. And you get these scholars for dollars and the commentators that compile the hadiths and the narratives. They're the ones that are, it would appear, creating the Islam from the sources that are left behind, which goes back to that discussion that we had probably a year or two ago about whether Muhammad existed or not. And if you go by the argument that Muhammad didn't exist, then what we're discussing tonight makes a lot of sense. If Muhammad did exist, then what we're discussing tonight doesn't make sense.
Yeah, you would definitely have expected a much clearer timeline, and the most important things would have been revealed first and so forth over time, right? And of course, that's not what we see. Good. Okay, let's move on to 240.
I just thought your mouse was a muhu on my screen.
And a muhu, for those people who don't know, is a South African term for a little insect. So there we go. Right, 240, Sahih International. And those who are taken in death among you and leave wives behind, for their wives is a bequest, maintenance for 1 year without turning them out. But if they leave of their own accord, then there is no blame upon you for what they do with themselves in an acceptable way. And Allah is exalted in might and wise. Yusuf Ali, those of you who die and leave widows should bequeath for the widows a year's maintenance and residence. But if they leave the residence, there is no blame on you for what they do with themselves, provided it is reasonable. And Allah is exalted in power and wise. So who is the blame, though? Who is the blame supposed to be here, right? So the let's just say the man dies and he leaves behind a wife or wives, right? and he's supposed to give them some maintenance and a residence, which you could say is a good thing. Presumably today we would bequeath that, right? But if they leave, there is no blame on you. Who is the you there?
No, the guy who
Anybody know?
died.
Okay, but if he's dead and he's left them the maintenance, whatever they did surely is not, there shouldn't be blame on him anyway, right?
Well, this is the
So-
whole point. This is to tell the guy, listen, no points will be deducted from your account. So you're going to be blameless if they leave before this year is over. So you're not going to be deducting any points from your account. So God is not going to see you any worse than what you are at the moment.
Because who is the one that's providing the maintenance? Where's this money coming from to give her a sustenance for a year?
Presumably that's the husband, right? Who's leaving
The
whatever-
deceased, yeah.
But then again, as we get to later on in the Quran, right, he leaves a much smaller amount to the wife than he does to any daughters, right? So
Yeah, it's a contradiction.
I think it's worth mentioning as well when we look at this. It says there, blame on you for what they do with themselves, provided it is reasonable. I mean, reasonable is a very ambiguous term, depending on what context you're going to use the word reasonable. So, from whose point of view is it reasonable, their actions, and what are those actions that are going to be considered reasonable?
yeah, or unreasonable. Yeah, that was the second point. So you've got straight to it, which is acceptable in Sahih International or reasonable, right? So what is reasonable, and more importantly, what is unreasonable? Because oftentimes reasonable could be a countless number of things. But if you know what unreasonable it is, then you could just go by definition. If it's not this set of unreasonable things, then it's reasonable. But presumably it's not said here what is reasonable, right? Let's just see if it says anything in the tafsir.
I would imagine this is on marrying somebody else.
Well, as long as they wait for, is it 4 months? Remind me.
Well, 3 or 4 months, depending where you read.
Yeah. That should be fine, right? Bequeath their wives regarding their wealth, sustenance, habitation for a year without turning them out. Well, how could you turn them out? Presumably you could leave something in your will, I suppose, if you were not a good Muslim, and say, hey, as soon as I die, whoever takes over, presumably it's the daughters or the son, because they get more anyway, turn the mom out, right? Without turning them out of their own accord. Or if they marry before the lapse of a year, there is no sin on you. On the inheritors of the deceased to stop providing sustenance and habitation after she leaves the house of her husband and remarries in that which they do of themselves, nor is there any blame on them in what the wives do to themselves within their rights, looking for remarriage. Okay, so remarrying is obviously one of the primary things here, making themselves beautiful for this purpose. The substance due on the deceased towards any wife he leaves behind was, however, abrogated by her inheritance, Allah Almighty, for he is vengeful towards any that leaves what he has commanded, in that he abrogated apportioning a year of sustenance and habitation to the wife whose husband is deceased, and substituted it with what is due to her inheritance, a quarter or an eighth of the wife's decease. So there we go. So obviously they had to say something about the stops because, as you say, this seems to be problematic with the inheritance that comes later on. And so here he's attempting to address that, right? Where there's an abrogation.
He says, forget about the year. It says in the Quran that it's a year, but God doesn't want this to be a year. He actually wants it less. So he changes his mind and says, no, never mind that. Just give them an eighth and send them on their way.
Yes, he was abrogated by the inheritance verse 412. Our wonderful 412. Oh, that 412 refutes the Quran. Remember that one, Muslims. If you go read 411 and 412, that error in the Quran can't be from Allah. That knockdown, irreversible, irrefutable error in the Quran. So there we go. Okay, good. Anything else?
But he also says that this is abrogated. This is quite interesting. I've never actually noticed this because I've never looked at 240 stuffs here. That there are several exegesis here who are saying, yes, it was abrogated here. So the waiting of 1 year was abrogated by the verse 4 months and 10 in 234, which was revealed later. So in 412, okay? So the opinion of Al-Shafi, may God have mercy on the habitation, remains hers. So she gets an eighth and she's allowed to live there, but you don't use 240, the verses in channel chapter 2, number 240, to make any kind of decision, because all the decisions are made in 412 and the rest is up to your interpretation, how you do it.
Mm.
What a load of crock. Come on, how can anybody worship a God that does something like this? Really?
But
I mean,
and this book was in heaven for all time, right? So he could have got it right in heaven, right? Abrogation wasn't required. Yeah. Again, that's why we'd love to have a Muslim on. If you're a Muslim here and you want to come and try and attempt to explain what appears to be inexplicable, you're more than welcome. I'm just going to have a quick look here and see.
Because this is quite social. If you die, leave them there for a year so that they can go and reorientate themselves. It's like firing someone, but you give them a year, to leave and find a new company and blah, blah, blah. If you're closing down the company or something. And that's social. And this is what is being done here. And then it's being abrogated. And they say, no. You only get 1/8. That's it. Run along now. That's it.
Yeah. Well, like I say, if you're a Muslim, you want to join us and try and explain this, then please do.
Unless it's Muhammad who dies, who's a multi-millionaire, billionaire, then of course it's different, because then 1/8 is worth more than just 1 year living in a house.
Yes, presumably. Does anybody know what he was supposed to have been worth when he died? Is there any even remotely?
Well, there's different versions. There's one version which says he was a pauper, because it says that the chimney stayed was off, so there was no smoke coming out of the chimney, and this is being seen as a sign that there was no food being cooked, so there was no money to cook food. So he was so poor that he had no money. But then, on the other hand, you have 23 wives with slaves, with servants, with the entire entourage, each living in a house. This upkeep costs a lot. And then, if you see that he went from 1/5 to 2/5 to 3/5 of all the booty that he got, there were entire palm. What do you call these things? A congregation of palms.
Congregation of palms, like palm trees, you mean? Or
well, if you have a lot of them, what is this called? Plantation.
plantation. Okay, yeah.
He had a whole plantation of these palm trees, and so he had a couple of these. So he must have been really, really rich, the richest person on the whole Arabian Peninsula.
Well, you would think so if he was the prophet and the leader of this group, and they eventually conquered Arabia, right? But again, here's Muhammad Islam saying if he wanted to, he could have lived a rich life. Well, what's wrong with living a rich life? If you are an extremely moral person, right, the wealth that you have, you could make great use of it and very likely help more people than if you gave it away to people who didn't use it or weren't as moral. So what is wrong with living? In fact, to me, if you were a prophet, why not have a great deal of wealth that you could then spread out amongst the people, because you know more, you've been guided by God in this case. And why would you not have the wealth that you could then spread and use it in the most moral way, because you have the best guidance, as opposed to giving it away to people who might drink, who might gamble, who might do immoral things with money? To me, it seems like a rich person that is guided by God could do a lot better as a rich person than as a pauper.
Well, the thing is that it's the way he got his wealth. He was a pirate. He was a gangster. He just stole from other people. He never made an honest living. He just stole what other people had.
Okay, shall we move on to 241? Here we go. 241. Short verses now at the moment. Sahih International. And for divorced women is a provision according to what is acceptable, a duty upon the righteous. Yusuf Ali, for divorced women, maintenance should be provided on a reasonable scale. This is the duty of the righteous. So this is again a repeat of something that we read some time back, and pretty much similar to what we've just read. I don't know that there's anything more to say there other than we have heard this again on a reasonable scale, right? Because we did read a verse last week or the week before about, if you don't have much money, you give of what you have. If you're rich, you give of what you have, that which is reasonable. Who decides what's reasonable, right?
There's the point.
Generosity and kindness. I mean, this all sounds great, right? But then you critique it a little bit and you have a look and well, one person's generosity is giving her one coin and not beating her to death, right? Somebody else's generosity is giving her a house, right? And you going to live on the street.
This is why Islam, it pads itself out with with words like you've got there in that tafsir with generosity and kindness. It's like stocking filler. It's just word salad. It's just to expand, to make the religion pious and holy and seem or appear or have, it has the veneer of generosity and kindness. But when you actually go to the source, Islam, and you use such ambiguous and loose words as reasonable, not that the word reasonable is ambiguous and loose, but it is in this context, because as you've said, how do you discern what is reasonable in this sense? Whose opinion is the word applicable to? Is it subjective or is it objective? We've got no guidelines from Allah as to what reasonable is, yet he's the one that keeps using it. These are Allah's words. This is his language, a book made clear, easy to understand, sent forth to set matters straight, a book that was in heaven before the universe was created. And yet he can't seem to use language that helps us understand what is and what isn't reasonable. He keeps using these ambiguous terms.
Yes, it's just general language, right? And here's Ibn Kathir claiming that this ayah was abrogated. The majority of scholars said that this ayah 240 was abrogated by ayah 234, what Allah said. Their wives shall wait with regards to their marriage for 4 months and 10 days, for instance, Abu Bakr, etc. Right? So again, here's one scholar claiming that 240 has been abrogated. I just want to see if there's any... At the end of the discourse, there's been honorably and an obligation on those who fear thee. No, there's nothing else there. So there again, you've got one scholar saying it's abrogated. The others are just sort of explaining it, but not really adding much to it at all. Right. So
is there? I've never looked into this. Is there an abrogated Quran where all the surahs that have actually been abrogated actually been removed from the Quran? Is there an abrogated edition? Do you know if that stops?
No, it's just a list.
Okay, then.
Yeah, why would you have abrogated verses in? How is that useful, right? If today there's a Quran, why would you keep the old verses in? To tell people what happened before? What's the point of that?
It keeps the ambiguous, because you see, for me, I think it's a clever tactic, because it depends which area that you're living in that determines what is and what isn't abrogated sometimes. Because if you're living in a more Muslim controlled environment, you can speak with that venom that the Quran's manifesto is written in, whereas when you're living in a Western world, you can pull out verses like this and say, look, the Quran is kind, it's lovely, it's reasonable. So you could pull out these verses when you're trying to pacify people by making a claim that Islam is a religion of peace. But that only works with people that don't know the Quran and they don't know the principle of abrogation. Personally, I'm going to abrogate my Quran with combustible petrol tonight.
Just be careful, because if you live in the UK and somebody finds out, you could be done for hate speech for burning your own, your own belongings, because some people claim it's special, right?
It happened to a guy in Germany as well. He also did it. Yeah, it was up for a while, and he made a big deal of it and said, "Listen, I'm going to go worse and worse." So he burnt a couple and he peed on them, and he went quite apeshit, because this was satire. Okay, so anyway, and then he was sentenced to jail for I don't know for how long. I don't even know if it's on probation. I can't even remember. But it was appalling. I think it was appalling.
Well, that's what's happening now, right? And it only happens to certain things. If somebody did it to the Bible or the Bhagavad Gita or, I don't know, Richard Dawkins' book, right? Nobody would bat an eyelid. People might be, that's not a particularly nice thing to do. But
yeah, the thing is, who burnt the first Quran?
Uthman.
There you go. So what's the point? What's the big outrage? I don't understand.
And in fact, many Muslims will claim this is not the proper Quran anyway. This is just an interpretation or what's the word, a translation, right? So it's not even the proper Quran anyway.
Look what
So
what happened when Tan put it on the floor.
that crazy Muslim picked it up, right, and decided it was
He went
his.
apeshit.
I can't remember who it was.
Now,
The one that was banned.
explain to me the concept of abrogation, because it's just exactly what Sandra says. This has been in some place, I don't know, heaven, I don't know, for trillions of years. And then he reveals it step by step by step, sentence by sentence, word for word. And then he says, oh, by the way, the sentences I gave you 5 years ago,
Yeah.
you now need to keep, but you need to somehow ignore them. You can't delete them. They need to be there. They need to be, you can't just take them out, which would make sense, but you need to keep them there. But you need to bear in mind that they were abrogated. Now, I'm not going to make a mark there. I'm not going to let you put a mark. This is abrogated. Go and refer to sentence X. No, 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 no. People who read this, and for the divorced women, a provision in a fair manner, they need to say, wow, this is nice. But later on, I will tell you that there's a different one which is going to do something completely different than this one. Now, can anyone explain this to me?
Well, the thing is, you see, to add further to that, this is a book made clear, a book easy to understand, being in heaven before the universe was created. So Muhammad gets this ayah, and he has, and so all of history has taken place right up until the moment that this ayah is revealed by Gabriel to Muhammad. And then the ayah only has a lifespan of what? How many days, months, years? Maybe 4 years, 5 years. So it only had a 5-year lifespan. So why was it so necessary for it just to last 5 years when the whole of history has taken place right up until the moment that the ayah is revealed? It has a lifespan of 5 years and then it's abrogated. That doesn't make sense in the slightest. In the time span of eternity, why would a ruling only have a benefit, if it is a benefit at all, because it's ambiguous, we don't know what the rulings are. Why would it only have a lifespan of 5 years? Where in Allah's infinite wisdom, because he's wise, he keeps telling us how mighty, exalted, and powerful and wise he is. Where is the wisdom in a law that only benefits, if it is a benefit at all, for only 5 years, 3 years, 2 years, a year, or how many years? The maximum it could have ever had is 20 years. That's the maximum from the first to the last. But we know it's not 20 years. We know it's significantly less than that. But even if you want to exaggerate and go with 20 years, okay, I'll give you 20 years. But what was the benefit of the law for 20 years?
Shall I make you really angry? Go to the next sentence.
All right, so 242. Sai International. Thus does Allah make clear to you his verses that you might use reason. Yusuf Ali, thus does Allah make clear his signs to you in order that ye may understand.
Read the corpus, please, because I think that really...
Thus makes clear Allah for you his verses so that you may use your intellect.
I'm sorry I had to do this to you.
Well, it says it all, doesn't it? That corpus sums this discussion up perfectly.
Yeah, the fact that you have to use your intellect, right? And most people have not read this, don't understand. Even the supposed scholars all disagree all over the show. So how good is this whole message? But there's something that Thunderous you mentioned, and I was going to speak about on the previous one as well. What was it? Let me just go back there just to see now. Can't remember what it was, or maybe it was stops. Maybe it'll come to me again. There was something there. So there you go. Well, thus does Allah make clear the verses that you may use reason. So, it was about the abrogation, right? And I agree with you, right? One of the responses that a Muslim have said to me with regards to slavery, and or you could extrapolate that they could say this as well. Well, hey, Allah needed to start softly, right? Get them on side, so to speak, and then slowly reveal more over time. So that's why these verses were abrogated. Once they were following Muhammad and doing what they were supposed to do, then we bring the more clearer verses or the better verses, whatever the case may be. But in the beginning, you had all these wild people doing whatever they were doing, and Muhammad was all on his own, although he had angels watching him and so forth. And so they would presumably gives some kind of response like that, which they did with slavery and other things. Hey, he couldn't outlaw slavery immediately because that would have dashed their entire economy, right? So maybe they will use the same thing with this abrogation, that Muhammad started slowly. But of course, he's got freaking God on his side, right? Why does he have to start slowly? And if the people are going to, if they're going to rebel, well, again, God's there, right? He can make the message clear. If they're going to rebel, God's going to protect him. Plus, they're going to have an eternity in hell, right? So why would you start slow? It's almost like God knows that his own creation won't follow his, stricter rules. So let's start with soft ones and let's change them after a certain period of time because, hey, I made these people. They're not going to follow me straight away or even my prophet, right? So, yeah.
And yet in the history of religion, this has never happened before, where it was slowly revealed in this kind of way, or that there was just some kind of opinion that the audience that was listening to Muhammad was somehow stupid, and he sort of like intellectually built them up with the more and more verses that they were receiving from Allah. In the history of religion, it's never been revealed like this before.
No.
You just get a revelation or a presentation or a book or a scripture or a scroll, and there it is. That's what it is. It's none of this slowly catchy monkey kind of business.
Yeah, you would expect it to be, beginning to end, and the important stuff at the beginning, and so forth over time, right? But again, this, as you've said many times, this was all done in heaven, right? So he would have known the best way to do this, and this clearly does not appear to be the best way, especially with all this going on. But anyway, but again, just to go back to this particular line, so 242 is a good representation, because you always talk about it, the book made clear, etc. Whoops, a daisy. I got rid of one of those there. Let me just bring that back in. Thus, Allah make clear to you his verses that you might use reason. I just want to check something though with this tafsir. Does that refer to his commands and prohibitions? So in the same way he's explained it to you, that what you just mentioned, God makes clear his signs for you that you may understand and reflect. Why do we keep saying, okay, so that's, there's no way to get rid of this one, right? Because Ibn Kathir it's just long, and he goes into the same sort of verses here. So God makes clear his sign that you might understand these guideposts. So learn, refine behavior. Yeah. So again, I suppose Muslims will claim, or we can use this to say, hey, but here it is. God says, he makes clear to you his verses, and the verses are the Quran, right? And that you might use reason. Well, so that's what we're appealing to every Muslim who's listening, to read the verses along with us and to try and use your reason. And I think if you do that, I cannot see how you could possibly be a Muslim. Right, let's move on to 43. We may have a visitor. So actually, just before I move on to 243, just give me one moment here. I'm just going to see there's a gentleman who wants to join us for a short time. He's traveling, and I think he's a Muslim, but he is traveling. And so let's just see if I can do so. Add him in here and bring him in for a short amount of time. So I apologize. I'm just typing to him here quickly. And let's see. There we go. Okay, I've sent him the link. Let's see if he will join us. So moving on to 243. Sahih International. Have you not considered those who left their homes in many thousands, fearing death? Allah said to them, die. Then he restored them to life. And Allah is full of bounty to the people, but most of the people do not show gratitude. Yusuf Ali. Didst thou not turn by vision to those who abandoned their homes, though they were thousands in number, for fear of death? Allah said to them, die. Then he restored them to life. For Allah is full of bounty to mankind, but most of them are ungrateful. Right.
Come on, this is a joke. This is a joke. So this is somebody performing magic tricks. Like, I'm going to saw you in half and put you together again. I'm going to kill you and put you back to life. Why? Well, just for the fuck of it. Just for the hell. Just for fun. Come on.
So here's what Ibn Abbas is interpreting this to mean. Allah mentioned the story of the fighters among the children of Israel, saying, bethink thee, O Muhammad. Have you not been informed, O Muhammad, of those old who went forth from their habitations to fight the enemies in their thousands, 8,000 in total, but they proved too cowardly to fight, fearing death, out of a fear of being killed. And Allah said unto them, die. Allah killed them on the spot. And then he brought them back to life after 8 days. So Allah is the Lord of kindness to mankind. To these people, for he brought them back to life. But most of mankind give not thanks. I don't think I'd give thanks if I was slaughtered by Allah and kept dead for 8 days and brought back. Is that like a punishment so that I'm going to be grateful for being brought back again?
There is no account of this in the nation of Israel's history, unless he's taken that from the Talmud. It's certainly not in the Hebrew scriptures. So Jalalain has clearly got an ayah in the Quran. He doesn't know how to explain it, so he's created a history to try and juxtapose it.
Oh boy.
He's trying to graft on some fake history. He's created a fake history that's happened in the nation of Israel, which hasn't happened. This account is nowhere to be read, though it may well be in the Talmud. I don't know. But even if it's in the Talmud, it's not a real event, is it? Really? What? God killed 8,000 people and brought them back to life 8 days later?
I've never heard of this anywhere else either.
No, have a word. It's just bollocks. Sorry.
But also he's the Lord of kindness, right? I think most human beings can.
By slaughtering 8,000 of his own people, he's a Lord of kindness.
Well, he brought them back, right? That's the kindness. So we'll ignore the slaughter and we'll just go straight with the kindness part, right?
But where was the kindness in all of the relatives, the wives, and the parents and the children of the men that he slaughtered during those 8-day period of time? Where was the kindness then? What about the people that they were fighting? What happened to the people that are fighting? So God slaughters his own people, but not the enemy. It's just full of holes, that account.
Now remember that all they're talking about is the kindness of bringing them back again. Don't go and ask questions about the other part of that, right? We've got to laser focus on the kindness of bringing them back. Forget that he said die and that other people would have been in desperate need. We've got to, just ignore that, right? For Allah is full of bounty to mankind, but most of them are ungrateful, and I think there's good reasons why.
This, what he's doing is he's trying to appear like, if you respond to my message, then you're showing gratitude to Allah. It's like that role, that effect he's having on his audience, that if you do not listen to me, you're proving yourself ungrateful. And he's obviously pointing to the nation of Israel to the side, saying they were ungrateful and they suffered. If you don't listen, you're proving yourself ungrateful. So you better listen.
And I slaughtered 8,000 of you. So imagine what I could do to you, right? So there's a inherent threat there as well. But I'm a kind God as well, because I brought them back to life.
It's what stops it, isn't it? Stick and carrot.
Yeah, I mean and we're only in Surah 2 here, right? I mean, goodness, we've still got 112 surahs to go, plus all the ayahs. Yeah, right. 244. Sahih International, and fight in the cause of Allah and know that Allah is hearing and knowing.
There's your justification for that verse. Yeah. To go and fight.
Then fight in the cause of Allah and know that Allah heareth and knoweth all things, right? Yeah. So that's the all kind God. Off you go and fight in the cause of Allah. Because remember, Allah can't do it himself. Although he can slaughter 8,000 people with a word die, but you go out and show that you can fight for Allah, because presumably he doesn't want to do it himself, because life's a test, remember? So if you get slaughtered, then you go to heaven, right? Because he could do it himself, allow you to live a life where in fact you could show even more piety, right? By showing you can pray 5 times a day. But for whatever reason, it's only those people who are fearful that get slaughtered. Other people, you have to go out and do his bidding.
Just going back a few verses to where it talks about the prayer. What happens if you're fighting during prayer time? Do you have to recite the prayer while you're in an act of violence?
No, I think it's while you're running away, right? Or when you're in fear, I think it was saying. So, I mean, presumably you could do it while you're literally fighting in fear, I suppose. It talked about on foot and on horse.
But it says that the middle prayer is the most important prayer of all. So what if the war is taking place during that time of the middle prayer? What do you do then? Do you just suddenly stop fighting and pray?
No, presumably you'd wait until you had a moment to do it, right? And that moment, whenever that moment was, either you would die or you would do it the moment you were not fighting, presumably.
Oh, so it's one of those situations like, yeah, hold my beer, mate.
Yeah, do it when you can.
This is also spiritual, okay? Remember that a lot of apologists spin this to mean it's not really fighting. It's just stopping smoking or something like that.
Oh, really? Just when verse 243 talks about that Allah killed those who were cowards that didn't fight.
Yeah, because they didn't stop smoking.
Well, the only thing they did, stop smoking were the people that they just killed.
It doesn't make sense. I'm sorry. But
I just wanna see.
they try this anyway. They will tell you, no, 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 no. This is not the killing. This is not killing people. No, come on. Islam is all about peace. No, it's about you struggling to perform a deed that is positive in the eyes of Allah.
Oh, I've seen those slogans on the sides of buses and that. This
Yeah, exactly.
going to the gym is my jihad. Oh.
Exactly.
Yes, yeah. And here's Ibn Abbas. Before I say that, thanks to TDS Dave again. There's the link for the Gin and Tonic Discord server. There's an after show. It's in the chat there. So if you click on that'll either allow you to download the app if you're on your phone, or it'll take you there in the browser. There is an app certainly for the Mac. Presumably there's a Windows one as well. So that's where we go for an after show once the live show is finished, and you can join us there, which is not recorded, and have a discussion with some of us
No, it's not smoking kills. It's Allah kills. But smoking doesn't revive you. Allah does. So
well, there you go. But here, even Ibn Abbas is saying here, right? So he brought them back to life. And in obedience of Allah, fight against your enemies, right? And know that Allah is hearer of what you say, and your intentions and the punishment is going to visit you. So even he was saying fight against your enemies here. So you might find other ones saying things like
smoking is your enemy.
Just seeing here. So it depends which scholar you look at, right? I mean, it's just here it clearly says your enemy. So if smoking is your enemy, that's not how most people will understand these words. Your enemy is somebody that's trying to kill you or fight you or whatever the case is. It's not your own.
This is what most of apologists try and make you think.
Yeah, well, I mean, really. I mean, only people who are absolutely taken are looking to make it sound good will accept this, right? To any ear that goes, hang on a moment, this is pretty barbaric. How else could I interpret this? Oh, what you could say is, oh, well, that sounds good. My word, I didn't like what I heard before. I'll take that. Thank you very much.
Yep. It's selective. It's a selective view of reality. It's picking and choosing what you want reality to be.
Exactly right. Right, 245. These are nice short verses now. Sahih International. Who is it that would loan Allah a goodly loan so he may multiply it for him many times over? And is it Allah who withholds and grants abundance? And to him you will be returned. Yusuf Ali. Who is he that will loan to Allah a beautiful loan, which Allah will double unto his credit and multiply many times? It is Allah that giveth you want or plenty, and to him shall you return.
Yep. I realized that Allah was so destitute he needed to have a loan. So
clearly, I'm sure it doesn't really mean that, guys. Let's see.
No, this is one of the things I saw Christian Prince do, because he says, what is wrong with your God? Is he a bank or what is he?
Allah prompted the believer to give in charity. So that's what it really means. I mean, of course, it could have said the word charity, but that would have made it, too straightforward.
Yeah, but the thing is, though, that yet again, this is an error, because when you give to charity, you're actually giving it away. You don't take it back. That's the whole point of charity. This is a loan, which means you get it back. The words are different. And then
so here's where the apologist would come in, Thunderous, and he would say, hang on a moment, if you give to charity, right, you're doing a good deed, right? And that good deed will be multiplied, because when you do that, it's a pay it forward thing. So when you do a good deed, that person will do a good deed unto another, and they will double that. And that these will all be good deeds, and you can look back as being the originator of all of these good deeds.
Yeah, but if it's a book made clear, easy to understand, that was in heaven before the universe was created, then why does the translator Allah have to use the word loan and not charity?
That's a good question. I just thought I'd throw in the apologist view.
Yeah, that's exactly what you get.
Anything. Charity, sincerely wanting nothing but for the sake of Allah. Every act is rewarded 1,000 times, withholds wealth from people, gives plenty to whomever he wills in worldly life.
But Allah hasn't actually thus far demonstrated how he reciprocates. We've not seen any evidence from him, so it's surprising yet that he's talking about that if you do this, I'll do that. But we've not seen him demonstrating any of this power yet thus far. He keeps saying he's got it, but he's not giving any evidence that he has it.
Yeah, it's just said rewards 1,000. The act is rewarded 1,000 times, withholds wealth from people, and enlarges, gives plenty to whoever he wills in this worldly life. You would think, though, Muhammad would be the number one guy that he would give plenty to, right? Because who else would he will apart from Muhammad?
Well, he did. How many wives did he have? I mean, how many times
Yes.
did he ejaculate in one evening?
So I guess it depends what you mean by the word wealth, right? Wealth could mean lots of people, slaves, money.
Well, the
Doesn't have
thing
to be money, I suppose.
No, because when people talk about wealth, I mean, normally in most people's understanding of wealth, it talks about a bank balance. Whereas with some people, when you talk about wealth, it could be like, the assets that they have, like an expensive sports car, several houses and properties, maybe investments in certain companies. That could be perceived as wealth as well. So when you're using the word wealth, sometimes you do really have to narrow it down as to what is a person's understanding of what the word wealth means.
Yeah, exactly. It's, again, one of those ambiguous statements, right? Yeah, double unto his credit, multiply many times. Yes. Okay, so another ambiguous statement. Right, let's move on. 246. How are we looking at time-wise? Sahih International. Have you not considered the assembly of the children of Israel after the time of Moses, when they said to a prophet of theirs, "Send us a king, and we will fight in the way of Allah"? He said, "Would you perhaps refrain from fighting if fighting was prescribed for you?" They said, "And why should we not fight in the cause of Allah when we have been driven out of our homes and from our children?" But when fighting was prescribed for them, they turned away, except for a few of them. And Allah is knowing of the wrongdoers. Yusuf Ali, hast thou not turned thy vision to the chiefs of the children of Israel after the time of Moses? They said to a prophet that was among them, "Appoint for us a king, that we may fight in the cause of Allah." He said, "It is not possible if ye were commanded to is it not possible if ye were commanded to fight that you will not fight?" They said, "How could we refuse to fight in the cause of Allah, seeing that we were turned out of our homes and our families?" But when they were commanded to fight, they turned back, except a small band among them. But Allah has full knowledge of those who do wrong.
Can I just comment on this?
Yeah, go for it.
And I'm not trying to do any kind of apologetics here, but he's clearly got all his stories in a muddle here, because this situation isn't the way that he's saying it is. So he's getting his. Remember the previous verses from probably a couple of months now, where he was talking about do not sell your stories for a paltry price. Muhammad, then there's a hadith, or I think is an ayah, talks about Muhammad being a good ear. All he does is listen to stories and he repeats the stories. So he's amalgamating stories and he's getting them all confused, or he's juxtaposing and he's grafting an account of one historical point that he's heard, and he's mixing it in with another point. This here makes no sense at all, because he's trying to quote Deuteronomy 17:14 here, where the nation of Israel did actually want to have a king, but not the way that he's describing it. And it was during the time of Moses, if he's going to try and quote the Bible. But this here, when you look at it, it says they said to the prophets among them, "Appoint for us a king, that we may fight in the cause of Allah." Well, why would you need a king, a person of royalty, to go and have a fight or to go to war? Not every up until then, there were many nations that did have kings or royalties, but we're living in a time now where politics had taken over from the laws of royalty. So this doesn't quite sit right historically either in that time frame context.
Okay, good. I want to welcome in Ishmael is here as well. Ishmael, good evening or good afternoon, wherever you are. Welcome to the Jinn&Tonic show. Could you just let us know, to whatever degree, presumably you're a Muslim, a little bit about yourself, and then share with us a few thoughts on what you've heard? I can see your camera's on there, Ishmael. Can you hear us? And if so, your mic isn't working at the moment. There you go. I heard something.
Okay, can you hear me now?
There you go. Yes, now we can hear you.
Okay, no problem. So, yeah, I'm studying currently what you would call Islamic studies at an institute. And I just heard of the show because of Speaker's Corner and your debates with Muhammad Hijab, etc. And so I haven't been following the whole podcast so far, so I haven't gotten everything. I've just got basically the last message. I'm not sure who it was from, or his last comment there. And without going into too much detail about myself, I just heard something about ears and ears. So just to clarify on that point, that was what the hypocrites who were living in Medina would say about Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, not what Allah was saying about Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But yeah, is there any specific verse that you would like to talk about? I'm happy to discuss.
Well, I mean, this one is a little bit complex, and like you say, you've just come in at the last minute. So, I mean, we could just have a quick look back here and see. Let's just have a quick look here. What do you understand by Surah 2, 244, and fight in the way of Allah and know that Allah is all-knowing and all-hearing? So that's Surah 2, 244. We can't hear you at the moment, so I don't know if you've muted yourself.
Okay, sorry, can you just
there you
put
go.
one verse before that, please, if possible, on the screen? Because I can't go out of my phone to look at the
Okay,
verse.
cool. So we'll go back to 243. 243, Sai International, have you not considered those who left their homes in many thousands fearing death? And Allah said to them, die.
Right, okay, no, I'm familiar, yeah, okay, I know the verse which we're currently referring to. So the verse that comes after this, 244, is وَقَاتِلُوا فِي yeah, okay, so fight in the way of Allah. It's, from my understanding, which obviously I'm not going to claim to be an expert, but I can give you a bit of a background. And I see you got the tafsirs there, so that's good. If you open Ibn Kathir, it'll probably give you a better background. But it's let's see what
that's a very long one. I think we look normally at Jalalain and Ibn Abbas, because Ibn Kathir is very long and he puts multiple ones together there.
No, that's just to get a nice understanding. Jalalain is very good, but to get like the full context, because as you see in the beginning, in 243, it's talking about after Moses, a certain prophet, and the people there, they were caused to die and they were raised back to life. And then the address goes now to the Muslims themselves living in the time of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that they were given encouragement now to fight. That now Ibn Kathir would probably be able to tell you which battle that was referring to, and it's not to be taken as a general command. I suppose that's what you're asking, whether I understand it as a general command or I understand it as something specific to those people at that time.
Well, obviously, he if we go back to if we go back to 243,
right.
He slaughtered thousands of them, which the tafsir say are 8,000, and he told them die, and then he restored them to life. And then in 244, he said, fight in the way of Allah. So as somebody who's reading this from the outside, at least, and obviously my co-hosts can give their views, this sounds like a threat, right? Look what I've done to these other people, and I brought them back 8 days later. You need to fight in the cause of Allah. And as the tafsir, certainly some of them say here, it is fighting your enemies, right? So it's not fighting your inner demons or some other apologetic type of response. It is, in fact, fighting enemies. And it's a way, seems to me at least, to say, hey, look at my power. I can slaughter people, and I did slaughter them and brought them back. You need to fight in the way of Allah. So it's like almost like a threat to the people to go on and do what they're being told to do, right? How do you see that?
No, I'm definitely not going to go to the apologetic route. It's not to do with fighting your inner demons. It's 100% to do with fighting enemies, whether or not the verse made that clear, but that's obvious in the context. And yeah, okay, I understand your question. Now you're trying to say that from the verse before, do we understand that God is trying to show that he was able to kill all of those people, so you rather fight or else you're going to die? That's, I would understand if someone just at a first glance could have possibly got that message. But if you just, a lot of other places in the Quran, which we're also going to come to, I think in the next surah, Surah Al-Imran, Surah 3, the family of Imran, the same sort of method is used to give encouragement to the people to fight. And I'm not going to try and hide the fact that it's to do with fighting. Wars took place, wars happened at that time. It's definitely fighting. But what I'm going to say is that the message is not so much fight or I will kill you. The message is more that, from just generally reading the Quran, and I've seen it in other places which I can quote you now, the message is more to do with like life and death are totally in my hands. So whether you go there to fight or you don't go there to fight, eventually you're still going to die. That's generally the message we find, and this is one of the ways of portraying that same message. And I could give you other references of where almost exactly the same method is used.
Okay, so but is he saying here not to fear? In other words, because human beings have a natural fear, right? And if the case is, well, hey, whether you fight or you don't fight, eventually, you'll die anyway. I think that's obviously trivially true. There's no doubt about that. But it seems to be saying here that, hey, if you're in fear, if you're fearing death, then I'm gonna kill you anyway. It's almost like it seems like another way you could say it is, hey, don't be a coward here. Go and fight for me. Whereas, of course, Allah, and I made this point, and maybe you can respond to this, Allah could have wiped out the enemies without requiring people to do his bidding, right? So, and he did, right? He slaughtered 8,000 people when he said the word die. So why is it that he is trying to make them overcome their fear to fight in his cause when he could do it himself?
Yeah, so the second point, and that's like another huge discussion, is whether now if God wanted to, he could have just done it himself. So what's the point of the people? But I mean, that's just going to lead ad infinitum. It's going to be like, okay, what's the point now of that? If God wanted to be worshipped, he could have just created robots to worship him. Then the whole thing would now fall to pieces. And then it's going to be another existential question instead of now the simple question which you put forward. But just to, your question again was, I just narrowed it down to one question there. Sorry about that.
Yeah, so it seems to be this threat of, hey, I want you to fight and not be fearful of going to fight in my name, right? And again, he's also said here, where is it? Is it in this one of the previous verse? I just want to see here. He's also the most, is it the most kind? What was the words here? He's all wise, almighty. There was another, we did use the word, I can't seem to find it now. And it just seems to me, this is very difficult to put together as restored. He's the professor of bounty. He shows gratitude. People, he's, what does it say? A professor of bounty. For Allah is full of bounty to mankind, but most of them are ungrateful. So he kills them, then restores them to life, basically, and then says, go and fight in my name, and then wonders why they're ungrateful.
No, okay, wait, I don't know if I misheard, but I'm saying verse 243 is referring to those people like a certain prophet that lived a few thousand years ago, whenever, I'm assuming after Moses, and the fight in the way of your Lord is addressed to the companions of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I'm just clarifying that.
Well, it doesn't say that specifically here, right? It doesn't say that.
No, it doesn't. No, guaranteed. I understand. It doesn't say that specifically, but from the address, you would understand that 243 says, "Have you not seen?" So that address, whoever that was addressing, "Have you not seen?" Then the command that comes in 244 would then be addressed to those same people, and that would be the people who are reading the Quran. I'm like, that follows from the text, although it's not explicitly mentioned.
Okay, so all right, I'll let my colleagues come in a moment. So maybe you could just give me your view on why it is that Allah is wanting these people to fight on his behalf when in fact he could do it himself. And as you know, he did actually bring angels down to assist in a battle later on in the Quran anyway. So if he had the tremendous power that he did, why is it that he is, at least to my ear anyway, certainly trying to encourage, if not threaten these people to go and fight on his behalf when he could have done it himself? And this is to say nothing about them being robots, but he has the power, right? So why would he?
No. I understand. It's not being robots. It's just an example. I mean, okay, but just to clarify, so the point is you saying that I'm still saying that 244 is referring to the companions of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Although that wouldn't change your question at all. It would still be valid as to why your question would be, why is he trying to incite them to fight when he could have just destroyed everyone himself?
Well, so not everybody, but certainly the enemies of Muhammad, right? Yeah.
No, understood, right. But as I said, that although that might be a surface level question, but in essence, what you're asking is that why does God need the humans here in the first place? Why would
no. sorry, I'm not, no, I wouldn't go that broad, right? It's in the specific context. I understand that he could, hey, create them to worship him and give them free will, etc. But in this case, they are fearful. He's created them fearful. He's trying to overcome their fear. And I made the point as well, and maybe you can respond to this, that, hey, if in fact he had wiped out the enemies of Muhammad, then surely those people that were kept alive could have prostrated and shown their submission even greater for a much longer period of time. In other words, they would have been alive and given more opportunity to show their submission. But here they are feeling fearful, and they're commanded to go out and fight when he could have done that for him. It's like me being the king and telling the paupers to go out and fight when I've got an army that can do it for them or for me.
Right. No, I understand your question is not that broad. I know it's specific in the context, but what I'm saying is that in essence, it's going to boil down to that. But anyway, okay, let's leave that. But I'm saying we just need to clarify here that when it says, if you look at 243, let's just go to 243 on the screen, that 240, did you not see? So this is an address referring to whoever's reading the Quran, meaning the companions of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam till us now. Have you not seen? And that's a weird translation in a way, because obviously we didn't see, but we didn't see literally. So the address is to someone, and it's informing them about a past event whichever happened to those people who, not because they were fearing, but they were fearing, and then they were told to die, they were given back to life. And then in 244, and fight in the way of your Lord is referring to the companions. I think if you could just show a tafsir for 244, it would just clarify that God isn't telling those people who are scared.
Yeah, I was looking to see where he talks about, you know, the companions. It doesn't seem to say that anywhere here. There's
okay, no,
Jalalain.
Yeah, no, okay, no, you're right. But just go back to Ibn Abbas there. I just want to see that one there, because it seems to support what you're saying there.
Allah said to them after he brought them back to life, and fight in the way of Allah in obedience of Allah against your enemies, and know that Allah is hearer of what you say and knower of your intentions and the punishment that is going to visit you if you disobey what you have been commanded to do.
Okay, that would definitely support what you're saying. I'm not even going to doubt that. But I'm just scroll down a bit there to Ibn Kathir. I'm sorry, I can't use mine because my phone now.
No, you're on the mobile. Yeah, as soon as you try and go away, it'll drop the connection.
It's not picking up. I'm not able to. Okay, this is a long one.
I mean, you're welcome to look at this afterwards, and if you're back, as you say, next week, you can come back and talk.
No, I will be back definitely. Back, and I only have a few minutes now, so I just want to see what you all were discussing, etc.
That's fine. I will. That's fine. I'm not going to press you on it. You know, you came in at the last minute here. Again, we can have that discussion in the future. I'm going to pass over to my colleagues, and maybe they've got a question for you. I'm going to move on unless they want to go back. So, Andres.
Okay, yeah. The question I want to ask is in 243. It says talks about thousands. So Allah doesn't give the number of how many thousands, but 400 years later, the tafsir gives us a figure of 8,000. So where did the number 8,000 come from?
Okay, that is a very good question. Yeah. So basically, in the Islamic framework of the scholarly framework of Islam, obviously, what the Quran is telling us. So I'm just giving you a scholar's background, how we would not understand it, but how we would take in the information. So the thousands that the Quran is telling you, clearly thousands, that's taken to be a fact. I mean, like as a Muslim, you would take what the Quran says to be an absolute fact. So it's thousands. And then the tafsirs that then come, like, okay, you're looking at tafsir of Ibn Abbas, so that would be attributed to him. But now you'll have to look at, like, I don't know how much you'll have gone into hadith, but there's the whole chain. So similarly, in the tafsir of Ibn Abbas, there's generally a chain of narration in the Arabic. You look at that, see whether it's a sound, whether it's authentic or not, and then accept the 8,000 as maybe an additional information, but not something that would be taken for granted like the thousands. Now, your question, where does the 8,000 come from? Generally, in these cases, they say that this Ibn Abbas now was a companion of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and he would have looked at the books of the Jews and the Christians there. Example, that's one. Okay, sorry.
But the thing is, you see, it talks about the Jews there, children of Israel, then it gives you 8,000. So it's giving you, if you like, the people, the actual people, because it could have been Zoroastrians, it could have been Romans, it could have been Greeks or Babylonians, but it's actually specifically mentioning a certain type of people. Then it mentions the Jews, then it talks about a specific number, 8,000. Now, I'm interested to know, where there's no hadith quoted in this. I'm interested to know, where did this, the identity of the people come from, and where did the specific number of 8,000 come from? What is your historical point? Because it cannot be from, say, the Jews and the Christians, because they do not have this account in their literature. This account is not in their literature.
Yeah.
So it come from somewhere. It didn't come from the Quran, because Allah does not mention the background.
Yeah.
And it doesn't
No,
mention.
Okay, no, I understand. I'm saying here that in when it comes to tafsir of Ibn Abbas and looking at all the tafsirs, then you first have to understand the position of this. So this thing is not taken to be something which is just taken for granted, whatever it says in the like, because as we said, it's like obviously here in the English they haven't mentioned the chain, but generally in the tafsir you'll have his chain going up to him. They look at all of those things. Now your question, where did he get this 8,000 from? Firstly, the Quran itself doesn't say so you're highlighting that Tafsir Jalalain. So they have the people who specialized in Quran. Maybe they see, since Ibn Abbas is a companion of the Prophet, so he would have heard some from him, or they would go around looking at whatever historical records they have and given an figure based on whatever their opinion was of what they thought the story fitted. So as a Muslim, you take the Quran for granted, and whatever comes in the tafsir, depending on whether the scholars accept or reject it, you leave it as such. I don't know if you understand.
There is no historical record that gives us this account.
No, I understand at the moment. I'm saying at that time, Ibn Abbas was living at that time, would have looked at whatever information he could have get and given his opinion based on the information. We're not sure exactly. I can never tell you where he got it from. That's why it's not taken as something 100% accepted.
Is it possible that Allah reveals something in the Quran here? There is no historical evidence for it. So Ibn Abbas and Jalalain made it up, because Jalalain, he's got thousands, 4,000, 8,000, 10,000, 40,000, or even 70,000. He's mentioning different thousands, one up to the 70,000, which is a 60,000 variation on the figure that Ibn Abbas has given. So he could not refer to a literal historical account, because the historical account, if it was literal, would have had the same number. 10,000.
No. Okay. Yeah, right.
So what the number is.
Right. So
Ibn Abbas is given a specific number. It is not in any Jewish or Christian recension in their history of this account at all. It is nowhere in their writings. So where did this account come from?
Okay, so let's just look at the levels of the tafsir. So tafsir Ibn Abbas is by someone who was Ibn Abbas, a companion of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and Jalalain is coming Jalalain was written about 9. I think the author passed away in 911 is Islamically. That would be either way. So tafsir Jalalain is a tafsir that looks at all the previous tafsirs on the first level. The first level being like tafsir Ibn Abbas and tafsir al-Tabari and all these other tafsirs, and he takes their whatever opinion they gave and he just puts it all there. That's the sort of tafsir that Jalalain is. Whereas Ibn Abbas is not like that. So you're asking where they got it from. I'm not going to say they got it from historical records. If it's not there, it's not there. But obviously as a Muslim, you're not going to say that they made it up. You could possibly speculate that you wanted to, but the thing you'd have to consider here is what would be the need for them to make it up, because there are many other verses where stories are mentioned and things are mentioned, and there's no need to give an amount. No one asks for an amount is not given. This is probably, we're just going to speculate that it's something that they heard. If you want to speculate otherwise, you can, but in the end, it's not really of any great consequence, because it's not something that a Muslim would be required to believe in either way.
Well, it is of great consequence because it's in the Quran and Allah's revealed it. If it's not of great consequence, then there's no need for Allah to reveal it. And to give you another account, okay.
Wait 1 second. Sorry.
Let me finish. We have the story of Dhul-Qarnayn building an iron wall the size of between 2 mountains and covers it in brass. So there's another historical account that we cannot verify that's in the Quran.
Okay, but I didn't mean to cut you off there. Sorry, but what I wanted to stop you there was because we were going on to the Dhul-Qarnayn story. But it's
an example of a historical account written in the Quran that the Quran says is a reality, that Muslims believe as a reality, that took place before the revelation of the Quran. In fact, took place before Muhammad's birth. Yet we have no historical record or location of these events taking place.
Okay, no problem. What I was just saying is that it's of no. I'm not saying it's of no great consequence, meaning that what the Quran says is of no great consequence. I'm saying the opinions given by the different experts in the exegesis of the Quran, that's of no great consequence if they not come. That's what I'm talking about. That number given there is of no great consequence. Secondly, looking at the story of the Quran, okay, he built the wall, and you say there's no historical record for it, but the Quran didn't give a certain time frame. It left it absolutely vague. It could have been at any time. All you stating is that we don't have the historical records to back it up. And I, as a Muslim, I'm not stating that there are historical records. I'm just stating that it did happen. I'm not even stating that the war still exists.
But the Quran is a historical, yeah? You would say that the Quran is historical record. In fact, the Quran, it was history before history took place, because it was up in heaven, written before the universe was ever created. So Dhul-Qarnayn, in Islamic parlance, would be a prophecy, because that was written in heaven before the situational historical event took place. So this account of many thousands dying from a certain people, from a certain amount of number dying, then being resurrected by Allah, was a history yet to be taking place. Yeah, but we have no records of these events. There is no location of Earth where a giant wall made of iron between two mountains covered in brass. Can you understand the logistics of making such a wall the size of two mountains? And the logistics of getting the oil, the iron, fashioning it to melt it in a foundry so you can make it into iron bricks, and then covering that giant wall in brass. The logistics are impossible in themselves. But we think all that to the side. Where is the location of the wall on Earth? And this is
okay.
Historically, we have no account as to who the two-horned man is, where he went, why he went there, what nation he comes from, and the location of the wall. We have this historical event from a people not mentioned in the Quran what their ethnic origin is. We have no specific number, and yet we find a commentary where we find what the ethnic origin of these people are and the specific number as to how many they were. Where is the historical record for verification?
Okay. Right. Okay. So just firstly, on the first point you mentioned, it's a good point that it's like a prophecy. Everything there is like a prophecy waiting to happen. But obviously, when we're studying the Quran, we don't view it like that because it would just end up being confusing. Yeah, in essence, it was because it was written from eternity, and then after that, the events played out. I understand what you're trying to say. And okay, so I'm not sure if I understand that. Firstly, okay, you're assuming that it's a huge mountain that people cover up with iron, and maybe it was, as you say, it was massive. And
if you're studying Islam, then you'll be familiar with the Dhul-Qarnayn account. You know, it's the one.
No, I'm very familiar. Yeah.
It's the one where it talks about the sun setting in muddy waters.
I'm very familiar. I know.
Yeah,
which one you want to go into that one, or I don't know?
Should we keep that one for when we get to it? We'll give him a chance to.
Yeah, the reason why I mentioned it was because we've got a historical account here where.
Okay, that's fine, but we're spending like a huge amount of time now talking about something we're not talking about.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, we are. We're talking about how does the tafsir find out who these people are, what their ethnic origin is, and where does this number of 8,000 come from?
Okay. So okay, let's just tackle that quickly.
Why is the tafsir and the scholars for dollars, they have more information on this historical account than Allah is providing, and yet Allah has given us a book made clear, easy to understand, that's been created before the universe was here. So it's very
okay. So I mean, firstly, that's such a big assumption that okay, if something is left vague in the Quran and there are other details about it, it's I mean, why would you assume that every single detail about it had to have been provided? Firstly, right? Secondly, as I said, it's going to be of no great consequence whether the opinion of a certain exegete of the Quran was right or wrong. That's not going to be. Now, your question, where did he get it from? As I said, I cannot tell you. I'm not sure if anyone can exactly tell you. I can tell you in other places where he did get it from. Maybe people were talking in the area, maybe he heard from the Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or whatever the case was, but it's not something concrete and well established if it's just mentioned in the exegete. Okay.
The main point there, Ismail, is that if you say that there's very little consequence of this 8,000, right? That you're not going to pay attention to it, and he's providing this number as you say, which he didn't have to provide. Then why would one take him seriously in other occasions? If he's providing information, which, as Thunderous rightly points out, he doesn't have a basis for doing, and you are then saying, well, the fact that he doesn't have a basis means I don't have to pay attention to it, then what is it that says to you you should pay attention to other things he says?
No, that's a top question. Okay, I literally have just 2 minutes. I told you I have 20 minutes. I'll just answer that quickly. That's a very good question. As I mentioned earlier, the tafsir of Ibn Abbas is treated similar to the hadith, although you wouldn't see it in English. The chain is there. So if the chain is authentic and everything there goes, then we take that to be his opinion of 8,000. And obviously, when we say why would you take him seriously, no, we do take him seriously, but we do not say that the 8,000 is an infallible amount. And when we take him seriously in the sense that when something is left, like for example, if you're going to bring up the verses of killing in the Quran, then to look at the context, we take him seriously in terms of the there, because we know that a person living in the time would know that. That's generally the way we view these things. I'm sorry I can't give more clarity, but in the the coming week or the coming 2 weeks, if you have time, I'll be on the program and we will discuss this.
No problem. So that's fine. I appreciate your time that you've had. We're on, I think, 2:45. So if you're ready to come along, I think this is the next one. So yeah, if we just go back one, I think we're at 2:45. So from next week, we'll do 2:46. So if you want to join us next week, it's 8 p.m. UK time. And if you read up from 2:46 to say 2:60, for example, that's probably, we will be within that ballpark next week. And then at least you can come with some reading or some references or something like that.
Okay, thank you. I'll see you next week. Right, bye.
I appreciate your time. Thanks, Ishmael, and hopefully we'll see you again. Take care.
Thank you, Ishmael. I appreciate you coming on the show.
All right, guys, shall we leave it there? We're pretty much no,
I just want to say two things.
Sure, go for it.
It's a pity we went a little bit on a detour, because I would have loved to ask him, why is it that he said that the Quran was revealed in a specific sentence for a specific event for a specific time? What is it doing in the Quran today then? Is it just a reminder of what happened in those days? And the second thing is, and this is the point that you were making, Rob, if the tafsir says it's 8,000 and this was just, made up, why do we need the tafsirs?
That was where I wanted to go. That was the point I was trying to get to. I would have
done it exactly like that and not talk about Dhul Qarnayn and all. I would have just asked, well, what percentage of certainty or comfort do you have that what you are reading in the tafsirs is actually valuable for you if you have this obvious example here? Now, it's not made up. Okay, there's a story behind this 7,000 and 8,000 and 50,000, blah, blah, blah. There's different stories. Different people take different stories, and this is where they inject their numbers in here. But it shows how people are shaping Islam and not the Quran or the Hadith. It's human beings of like 500 years later.
Which is what I said earlier on, didn't I? That if you look at it from the perspective that Muhammad didn't exist, then this is an evolving religion and people keep adding to it as it gets older and older. The point I was trying to make with Dhul Qarnayn was the account of 7,000 and the ethnic origin of the people that there was 8,000 would have to be a historical event. And I was trying to bring out another historical event as to any time the Quran touches on history, which secular history should be able to verify, we can't verify anything historical that the Quran mentions.
Immediately out the window. No, but Ishmael, I mean, and I agree with what I'm seeing in the chat here. Ishmael was great in that he's articulate. He's slippery in that he very quickly, concedes things when he knows, it's the mafia method. Okay, I will admit exactly what I can't deny any longer. And then says, yeah, but this one here, this is good. And then you need to go to the next one. So, yeah, but it's a game that you play, yeah.
Well, I think the thing is, let's hopefully he'll come on again. Now he knows where we are and when we're going to go to, and he can have some response. But I think the whole thing with the tafsirs or the hadith for that matter, as both of you were sort of mentioning, is quite a strong thing. But he kind of mentioned it already. So his response stops to your question. Well, how much of this? He will say, well, as much that we can verify, right? If we can't verify something, we're not going to take that seriously. But we are going to take seriously his commentary on the killing verses, for example, because we know X, Y, and Z about that time, and other people will corroborate that, etc. So I think that question for him at least, won't be a difficult one to answer, right?
Correct.
The fact that he's not taking everything for him is not a problem, right? The 8,000, well, that's like, and he said it multiple times, right? That's a small point.
It's not relevant. Yeah.
But the thing is, you see, right? Muhammad reveals that in the 7th century. The tafsir comes along 400 years later, 10th century, 11th century, and verifies the number, which Allah doesn't do. He verifies the ethnic origin. That will have to have come from a historical record 400 years removed from Muhammad. That historical record should be relevant now, or available now, or accessible now. Because where else did the narrators, get the tafsirs get it from? That's my
presumably there might be an answer to that. He was just not in a position to give it. There may not be an answer at all, right? Who knows?
That's where they fold in on them. Says, well, the number's not relevant. Well, when we brought up the 8,000, the number was relevant. When you brought up the other commenter, then the number doesn't become relevant, and then he's challenging. Well, one of them was the contemporary of Muhammad at that time, and the other one was 400 years later. So already he's breaking down his line of reasoning when he realizes that the ground that he's standing on is suddenly starting to crack up.
Well, again, for him, I think it's an easy answer, right? He's saying that Ibn Abbas was the closest companion, so he's likely I think he used the word first source, and then Jalalain, or who was the other one there? Who was the one after that?
Jalalain.
Jalalain will be building on what Ibn Abbas said. So I suppose one then needs to narrow him down to, okay, which tafsir do you find is the most authentic and you're more likely to follow? The very early tafsirs, the ones who were the companions of Muhammad, or the later ones? Which ones? Because if they're in difference with each other, which that one was, the one said 8,000, the other one said 4, 7, 10, whatever, 50,000, whatever it is. Which one is he going to accept?
Yeah, but I don't mind the difference if the difference is something like 8,000, 10,000, 9,000. Fine, I'll be willing to forgive that. But when you're talking 8,000 and another one saying, could it be up to 70,000, which is a difference of 62,000, that's quite unforgivable. You can't make them kind of errors if this is supposed to be a religion of truth. To get 68,000 wrong and differ from a number of 4,000 to 70,000 when another one's given a figure of 8,000, that's quite unforgivable.
Yeah, I think you and I and Stops will probably notice that. For them, they won't see this as a problem, right? They'll just go, they're in the thousands, here's a number. I don't quite know how we got to that number. It's not an important thing. He obviously spoke to people at the time, and this was just his opinion. We don't care too much about that small opinion point, but other things we find that are more important. Okay, so what's your methodology for that? And then he will presumably answer, as he would have to you, Stops, hey, we have historical and corroborating testimony from other people about what the fight verses mean. Therefore, we're going to much more likely take Ibn Abbas on what he says about fighting than about the 8,000. And I think for them, that'll be an easy answer. For you and I, we can push this all night, but for them, this won't be a difficult thing to answer, I don't think. Okay. And I think there's much more tougher things that we could challenge that are harder for them to answer, exactly. where they can't get away with it. So maybe it's a case of picking the battles.
My point here would be very simple. If we just saw the verse here, God made the Quran clear, made the message clear, easy to understand, easy to remember, easy everything. There is no doubt in the book. Everything is clear. Why the fuck do we need a tafsir? Why do we need a human being to explain what a God could not?
This is a repeated pattern every week that we have this discussion, and we always seem to. It's like one of those repeated, almost like the namaz of Allah, where we repeat it every Friday, don't we? The same kind of things, the same conclusions, the same kind of agreements that we have. If this is a book made clear, then why does it need men to clean up the mess that this Quran is when it's supposed to be coming from a God?
And making it even worse.
I think that's a knockdown argument, guys. That one, they will have and maybe he'll come on next week, and I think that's where we can press him really hard. The 8,000, I agree with you, Tundris, and the difference there is problematic, but for them, they're not. I think there's much bigger things like this book being made clear that isn't, and this is something, because if this is not the case, they cannot be a Muslim. If the 8,000 is not the case, that won't stop any Muslim on this planet from being a Muslim. And I think that's,
My point is, though, okay, it's not that the number, it's that how did you get to the number? Whether it's, okay, fine, even if you want to overlook the difference between 8,000 and 72,000, you've still given a specific number, and you've still given an ethnic identity as to the people that were victim of Allah that was suddenly dead, then suddenly resurrected. Where did you get this information from? And what I'm trying to do with the way I'm trying to reason was, It might be a minor point, but it is still a point in a consistent pattern of every time the Quran touches on something historical, it is not verified in secular history. So it might be a small point, but it is a point, and it's a point, if you like, of joining the dots. It might be an irrelevant dot on your, join the dots by number in the image that you're trying to give, but you have to have a starting point somewhere and a direction that the line's going to be drawn in. And this is one of those points. It might be irrelevant to you two, but it's relevant to me as far as history is concerned.
No, I agree. It is. But I also think it's a case. Sorry, carry on, Stops.
No, I'm just saying that they have the text. They explain where they get the numbers. They're just using different references, and this is where the different numbers come from, because they are using different inferences. Because the one is talking about a battle here, the one is talking about a village here, so there are different people they are referring to, but they explain this in the text why they get these numbers.
But what I'm saying is, if you went to another book that talks about a historical event claiming to be religious, and yet you look at that book and you look at, say, the currency, the weights, the locations and the names and whatever, and you find secular history confirms that those people were real, those currencies were real, those weights were used at that particular period of time, the clothing they wore, it was that kind of clothing, then you've got some kind of chronology going on there, confirmation of some sort, whether you agree with it or not. There is a collation there.
Yep.
There is nothing here. Where did he get that they were Jews? That's the point. There is one Muslim guy saying, oh, they were Jews, and another one said, yeah, they were Jews. Fine, you can say they were Jews, but where did you get that information from 400 years later?
Yep.
All right, let's bring it to a close there, shall we, guys? Have you got a hadith of the day, Stops?
Narrated Abdullah ibn Umar, the Prophet was asked about water and what it is frequent and what is frequented by. It should be which is frequented by animals and wild beasts. He replied, when there is enough water to fill 2 pitchers, it bears no impurity. The people asked the Messenger of Allah, can we perform ablution out of the well of Buddha, which is a well into which menstrual clothes, dead dogs, and stinking things were thrown? And he replied, this is the Messenger of God, water is pure and is not defiled by anything. This Sahih Muslim 166 is repeated in 167. So what this means is water is not polluted by dead dogs, menstrual clothes, or whatever. As long as you have 2 pitchers that you can draw from this, there is enough water to make it pure. Now, it's a pity Amir Navabi is not here, because in Tehran, we used to have this. We on the side of the road, you used to have a jub, they call this a jub. And all the roads had jubs. Now, Tehran is slanted heavily. So from the north to the south, there's a huge difference of something like, 600-700 meters. And you have a lot of water coming down the mountains, and this flows to the southern parts of Tehran. So all over, you had these open canals of water where somebody might be, brushing their teeth or washing dishes, and then 10 meters downstream, somebody would be washing their hands or, again, brushing their teeth when somebody has just, washed their dirty dishes in there. Because it has been running for 10 meters, and Muhammad said the water is pure, and therefore it is finished.
A bit like the River Ganges, then.
It is like that, yeah.
Completely unscientific. I think Bob the Builder actually did that once in Speaker's Corner, and he went and challenged them all over the show. And of course, they didn't really have an answer to this, right? I mean, it's completely anti-scientific, unless you're claiming that it's all a miracle, right? Which, again, I don't think there's any view that's supposed to be miraculous, right? It's just a case of here's an observation, and God supposedly told him, right? And it's completely anti-scientific and mistaken and wrong, right? So again, just one of those things. Brilliant, guys. Thank you so much indeed. Thank you to all the viewers. TDS Dave, if you just pop the link into the Discord server, some of us might pop over there for a little while. You're welcome to join that. We'll be offline, so you can speak freely. It'll be sort of a private offline discussion anyway. Thanks to Stops. Thanks to Thunderous. As always, we will be back next week, same time, 8 o'clock, and we will be on 2:45, I think it is. 2:46.
No, we ended on 2:45. I just put this down here.
So we will be at Surah 2:46 for next week. Thank you to both Stops and Thunderous, and we'll see you next week. Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.